Welcome to The Difference Makers, a Paladin Security podcast. We'll take you inside the world of security and share firsthand expertise from our industry professionals. Join us as we dive into everything security and explore the journeys of those who go above and beyond to make our world a safer and friendlier place.
It's Mental Health Awareness Month, and it's often a topic that people consider taboo, which doesn't make a lot of sense when 1 in 5 people deal with some sort of mental health issue. That's right, 1 in 5. We all have mental health, but it's about how you take care of it. In this special episode, we're going to try to break the stigma and put mental health at the forefront. To help with that, Robyn Beach, a People and Culture Coordinator for Paladin Security, is here to share their story, as well as provide inspiration and options for others. They get so raw that we have to provide a warning. Some of what you're about to hear may be triggering and may not be suitable for everyone. Robyn, thanks so much for joining us for this special episode.
Absolutely. I'm super excited to be here.
We're excited to have you and hear your story. So I just want to dive right into it. Tell me, I guess, first of all, what is your relationship with mental health?
Well, I've been diagnosed with mental disorders since I was just a kid. About 13 was my first official diagnosis. Since then, I have received several others, unfortunately. It's just been a very uphill battle, of course, with mental illness, as it always is. But the relationship, it's eased over time because of therapy and different kind of strategies I've taken with it.
Mm-hmm. So when you were 13, how did you know that it was something that you needed to deal with? And did you even know that it was something that had to be dealt with? As a 13-year-old, I can't imagine, being like, oh, my mental health needs some attention right now.
Yeah, a huge part of it was actually peer support towards the darker things. So like my friends at the time, we didn't know that self-harm was like a bad thing. So harming yourself to kind of get that emotional energy out was applauded almost, which is obviously a very toxic situation. But I think I did kind of figure it out after I did end up in the hospital following a self-harm incident where I did attempt suicide. And essentially I had reached out to a helpline who immediately called the cops on me. And I had to sit with my dad in my living room for about 2 hours at like 11 o'clock at night while the cops asked him why he was a bad parent.
Wow.
So at that point I was like, well, this is probably not a healthy thing to pursue. So that's when I kind of made the decision for myself to not do that anymore, because I was clearly hurting not only myself, but the people that I love.
Well, and that is quite traumatic to reach out for help and then have it kind of turn into that kind of situation. So I guess what were your thoughts when you did that, thinking you were going to get help, and then it turned into that type of situation?
Yeah, so essentially on that call, I had to advise them that I was okay. And of course, as an adult, I do understand that they are obligated by law to contact the authorities if they feel as though your life is genuinely in danger. I happened to be in a situation where I wasn't in immediate danger. The self-harm, the injury had stopped bleeding and all that kind of stuff. And the individual on the phone had actually convinced me to admit what I had been doing to my father. So right before the police came to my house, my father and I had a very candid discussion about what I was doing, why I was doing it. I surrendered the implements I was using to him, and we had a good conversation. And then the cops showed up, and it was just not a good time for anybody.
No, I can imagine not. So how did your dad's reaction affect your future? You said that at that time you decided that it was not a good thing to keep doing, and so obviously it sounds like he was quite supportive and in that situation.
So I definitely had a benefit and a not so benefit when it came to my father. So my father's a very good man. I'll sing his praises to the moon and back. When I admitted to him that I was harming myself, he was very, very understanding, supportive. He certainly didn't put anything on me. He didn't expect me to know any better. He just asked for me to stop and to surrender my implements. My father is in the military, or was in the military at the time, working in the medical profession. So I imagine that he had encountered these things before. The only not so benefit is that, unfortunately, he does have kind of an older school way of thinking. So emotional outbursts, such as self-harm and stuff like that, weren't really a thing in my house. Like he wouldn't really talk to us if we were crying or upset or anything. We had to calm down before he would even talk to us. So on one side, he was very supportive of me stopping self-harm. And on the other side, it did unfortunately result in a lot of like emotional compartmentalization, I guess, where I'm just like not expressing myself. So it took many years to kind of get over that teaching.
For sure. And now you said that you decided to stop self-harm at that point, but that's not where your mental health journey ended. Tell me a little bit more about how it kind of evolved and changed throughout the years after that.
Absolutely. So self-harm kind of became an addiction for me. I did stop for a time when I was young. But when I was fully in high school and stuff like that, all those old habits came back. I continued to self-harm up until I was about 19 years old. And then I made that decision. This is it. I'm done. And I haven't harmed myself since I was 19. So it's 14 years, sorry, since I've done that, which I'm very proud of. So that was a huge step for me for that. I continued to kind of shelter what I was feeling just out of like protection for myself as I was developing more, as I call them, acronyms to add to my mental health roster. And I started kind of shying away from disclosing it to doctors. So it took until I was about my mid-20s. I was actually looking for a surgery that was obviously not related to mental illness. And I was like, probably now's the time to get diagnosed. So when I was first diagnosed with mental health, it was a major depression diagnosis, and that was when I was 13. My next diagnosis was at 21 for generalized anxiety disorder. And then at 25, I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, a version of OCD, which is like, I don't even know if it's officially considered, but it's called trichotillomania, not really talked about a lot, as well as a couple others as well. So I guess over time, I've just kind of accumulated more and more mental health problems, but in time, like they all kind of work against and for each other. Both anxiety and depression present very commonly in the same people. Obviously, they present themselves differently person to person, but there's ways to do therapy where you can work on both things at the same time.
Mm-hmm. I do want to talk a little bit more about self-advocation and different, treatments that you have pursued. But I want to go back to a little bit to your time in high school. What was it that made you, I guess, want to, do self-harm or whatever that kind of pushed you to that spot?
Yeah, it was always kind of self-harm for me was a direct translation of emotional pain into physical pain. And the way that my brain kind of processed it was that physical pain, obviously not for chronic pain sufferers, however, but for physical pain, it passes in time. So it's like if I can translate this anguish that I'm feeling in my head to a physical thing, and then in an hour, it doesn't even hurt anymore, then it's like that pain is gone, as opposed to kind of sticking it in my head and kind of suffering over and over with these scenarios. I would then translate it into a physical pain, so cutting myself or burning myself, depending, and that would kind of release that angst, so to speak. So pretty much anytime that something severely emotional happened, but it's high school.
So did you find that you had people to talk about, or did you go to you said you went to like the hotlines before, but did you find you had people that you could talk to or lean on or have support through friends or family to kind of guide you into the right direction?
Yeah, so I certainly don't want to say anything against hotlines, because if you need one, use it. I will say that my experience with hotlines wasn't so terribly pleasant. Obviously, with that one, I had called, I think, 2 or 3 times. And I just remember one of them, the guy just did not seem to want to be there. So it's like you're kind of going through strife and somebody's having a bad day and kind of being vaguely rude. It's like, I just don't need this right now. In terms of supports, I was able to, when I was 13, I went to my first social worker for my depression, because obviously I had followed self-harm. So there was a follow-up that my father had to do, as I was a minor at that time. So I did go to a social worker. I attended that for 7 months, I think. And then I quit. I told my dad I didn't want to do it anymore. I magically don't have depression if it means I don't have to go to the social worker anymore. Unfortunately, that kind of ended up being a thing where I just kind of shut it down and made it seem like it wasn't happening. My family only really found out this year about how severe my mental illnesses are. Because I went through a really bad, or I guess technically last year, I went through a really bad period last year of about 6 months where it was just a really dark episode more than anything. So I had to go out and visit my family and kind of reset myself and put myself back into a good position. So in terms of knowing about my mental health, they've known for a good long time, but the severity of it, I always hid from them because I wanted to protect them. I didn't want them to know that I thought these things or had these dark thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Why do you, I mean, that's so common. It seems like if you talk to someone, you don't know. A lot of people say, oh, I didn't know it was like that, or I didn't know it was, that severe. So why do you think, like you said, you wanted to protect them, but, why is it that you think that, you did hold it back, or other people hold it back from sharing? Is there kind of something that they might be worried about or scared about in a way?
Very much so. Like the people that care about you, they're always going to worry about you. But when it comes to things like saying like I have suicidal ideation, that's a very scary sentence to say. And obviously, if you're feeling that way, you should disclose that like as best you can to people that you trust. But I don't know, in my own mind, it was just like, I would rather them not know, because if I went down that pathway, which, working hard not to every dang day, but, if I went down that path, I just didn't want them to know I was suffering the whole time. I'd want them just to think that I was gone and that was it, kind of thing.
And I mean, 1 in 5 people have mental health issues. We all have mental health, but, 1 in 5 people have some kind of issue that they, want to deal with. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, why is there still such a stigma about it when, almost everyone has something that they can talk about, right?
Well, it really, there's tons of different reasons why there's stigma. If you want to talk about it between the genders or sexes, there's reasons why it's more difficult on either side or any of the sides. If you want to talk about medication stigma, it's present for it almost seems like every aspect of it. Because if you want to start talking about, all these newfangled mental health issues, because we didn't have diagnosis. I mean, PTSD started off as shell shock, So as our understanding of these mental illnesses is gone, we have reclassified them and retitled them to be more appropriate to what they are. But again, we have generations of people who just grew up and those didn't exist. I know my partner has ADHD, and that is one that is super stigmatized just because people don't really recognize this as an actual illness. Some people just consider, they're a kid, so they're really active. It's no, these are actual things that have far-reaching consequences outside of the base symptoms that you're anticipating. So I think the stigma comes from a couple different places. Primarily, one is the fact that obviously new classifications, people are like, well, that just didn't exist, so I don't really believe in it. And then we've got kind of emotional issues. So people always present differently. Different mental illnesses have different symptoms. And then we have kind of the gender and sex line where it's unfortunately, men are just raised to not show their emotions. And if they do so, then they're deemed as less masculine, which is just terrible. But it also stops them from proceeding to get help. And for women really don't want to be viewed as overly emotional people because that's the stereotype. That's what people have used against us for years to keep us from promotions, from owning property, assets. So it's having these feelings that are abnormal and neurodivergent. It's terrifying. And sometimes you just don't want to approach it. You don't want to disclose it to your friends because you don't want them to think badly on you or to think differently of you. So it definitely took me some time to get over it, and now I'm just open book about it.
Do you think that has come with just you being comfortable with who you are and that type of thing too?
That's definitely a huge part of it. I grew up as a military brat, obviously, so I moved around a lot of places, and it requires you to be a very adaptable person, to make friends and to be able to move from school to school every year, 2 years, 3 years. So that's definitely one thing. And I think the other was I went back to post-secondary for a second round. And I ended up in a post-grad program. So a large, like the majority of the class was in their early 20s at the time. And I was like turning 30. So I was like, oh. But I was around all these people, writers, and they all had mental illnesses, but they were all like where I was when I was that age, where they were afraid or they didn't know what to do or their family wasn't supportive. And like just seeing that, I think that was a really big push for me because it's like, these are my friends. I don't want them to have to suffer like I did. I want them to be able to get access to the help and the resources and feel comfortable talking to people. And that kind of made me do a bunch. Like I did mental health awareness challenges on Facebook, like those video push-up challenges where I talked about my own experiences, prescriptions, all that kind of stuff. I just wanted to show them that it's okay. It's not your fault. This is just kind of the chemistry of your brain. Sometimes our chemistry is wrong.
For sure. So do you think, like, tell me a little bit more about what you're doing to advocate and help others and kind of share your story. And then maybe also like what more you think needs to be done to get to a place where everyone can, I don't know if that's possible, but get to a place where everyone feels comfortable to talk about it and share.
Yeah, absolutely. Self-advocation, so important, especially in healthcare, because as plenty of people are aware, sometimes when you go to a doctor, they just don't seem to want to diagnose you. Like I think I had used an example of abdominal pain before, where, you know, a woman presents at the hospital with abdominal pain and they won't even bother to do tests. They'll tell you it's your menstrual cycle and that's it. So you could be having a terrible issue with your insides, but they won't actually check. So it's so important to self-advocate. Going to your doctor saying, I have these symptoms, I would like to be tested or at least figure out what this is. What I've done as participation, I guess, in breaking the stigma, I used to be a speaker and host for sexual assault survivor groups back in the day before I had moved to Ottawa. Additionally, obviously, I continue to do those challenges on Facebook. I don't know how much of a reach those have, but at least for my own group of people, that's what I want to do. Like, if you can't do it for the whole world, do it for one person. So that's what I've done. I joined the DEI committee here at Paladin once I came into my current role. Yeah, which is fantastic. And it helps me work towards that. I think a huge thing that will actually genuinely contribute to the erasure of stigma is paid mental health sick days, like a specifically designated category that will allow for mental health book offs that aren't considered just not being sick because it's invisible. Because like I definitely don't book off or call out from my work unless I have to. But when I have to, I need to be taken seriously. If I'm having a day where I cannot get out of bed because of depression, that has to be acknowledged as an actual thing. It's not me being lazy. It's the fact that I literally can't find the will to live. So for people who don't experience mental illness, it's very, very hard for them to understand. And while as common as it is, there are still people out there who are 100% pristine neurotypical. And good for them, honestly. I'm so happy for them. But when you have never experienced it, you really just aren't in a place to really have an opinion with how people's symptoms manifest. You don't have to understand. You just have to accept that some people just can't do what they need to all the time.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And it makes me think, like, do you think any of that has changed with COVID and people working from home and then, you know, people's mental health being more at the forefront and maybe people understanding a little bit more, like even the like companies understanding their employees a little bit more and understanding like where their mental health is?
Yeah, I think COVID was a huge game changer in so many different areas of the professional life. In terms of mental illness, I feel as though pandemic kind of gave way to people experiencing, I'm not trying to say transitory in a bad way, but more transitory kind of mental health symptoms. So for extroverts who are being locked inside for the first time ever and told you literally can't go and see anybody, like that's a fair enough reason for like you to develop a form of depression. And it doesn't have to last forever because not all depression is permanent. But if you're experiencing transitory events, all of a sudden you have this new understanding of people who experience depression on a chronic scale. So I think pandemic actually was a game changer in terms of mental illness, because it really forced us all to go through like a collective cultural trauma, which is what it was, because we were all terrified. We didn't want to go see our families because we were afraid we would hurt them, you know? And that's a really scary thing to go through. So yeah, people experiencing mental health crises in pandemic, while not something that I want to happen to people, I think it did improve how people do understand mental illness and how it can just strike out of nowhere.
For sure. I want to go back on something that you said a few minutes ago. You were talking about how you're on the board or on a board or panel for the sexual assault survivors. And I want to know why you wanted to get involved in that.
Oh, of course. So it wasn't anything super fancy like a board or anything. It was just like I would rent out a space at community centers and host. And it wasn't usually huge groups. It was only like 6 to 10 or whatever. But we would have open floor discussions. The reason for me wanting to participate is that I think it's safe to say I'm a victim myself, or a survivor of sexual assault on multiple occasions. And unfortunately, it's super prevalent. So tons of people are. I kind of shut myself down after it happened, and I didn't really figure out, because it happened when I was 15 years old. So I didn't understand really what had happened. And it didn't really occur to me until about 2 years after that. So with that kind of distance, I somehow was able to like deal with that incident really well, like in retrospect. So around 17, I started hosting those, and it was honestly just a great experience because there's a sense of community in it. And it's an awful thing to have to bring people together, but who else can you talk to that would really understand all the feelings? Like, there's so many complex feelings when it comes to sexual assault. Like there's guilt, there's survivor's guilt, like it's terrible. So it's good to have that community, and humans by nature are a tribal species. Like we work best when we have our groups. So yeah, I just thought it was a very natural thing to do. And I've always been very empathetic. So I try to help whenever I can, wherever I can.
Well, especially being that age and knowing that you're not the only one who has gone through that, I'm sure, as you said, was really helpful for you and the other people who came to that discussion. So now I wanted to lead that into supporting others in the workforce. At Paladin Security, we have a lone workers program for those who do work by themselves. What are your thoughts on that, and how do you help those who may be working by themselves?
Yeah, I mean, I was previously working lone worker and on overnight shifts. So I know better than most that this job can be really lonely, like very, very lonely. And working overnights can sometimes cut you off from like family and friends. And it's not like you don't like or love them anymore, or that they don't like or love you. It's just the fact that you literally live your life on an opposite schedule. Like your parents can't call you in the middle of the day anymore because you're asleep. So it's very difficult. My recommendation for that is to find yourself a community. So I found myself fellow overnight workers who just so happened to be into Dungeons and Dragons. So that just really worked out for me. But if you want something where you actually participate in person, go into your community, find something that you're interested in, immerse yourself in it. And if it's more something where you don't want to get out of bed, or you don't want to go to socialize, or you're more introverted, or that's maybe not your thing, then find a community online. Discord, Facebook groups, like social media is so useful for that. And there's so many cons to social media that we might as well take advantage of the pros. Now, obviously, as a company, Paladin does have a lone worker program that is a check-in to ensure that everybody's safe, but it doesn't necessarily provide support, like emotional support, or alleviate the feelings of loneliness, because you're on your own. So I guess professionally through Paladin, my number one recommendation would be to talk to your PNC coordinators and get access to the EAP, because it's completely confidential. I've used it before, so the company doesn't even know if you've contacted them or anything. You can ask for immediate counseling when you call in, or you can book short-term counseling as well. And I think it clears you for 6 sessions. I may be wrong on that, but it's 5 or 6 sessions. And you can get your own therapist to talk with and sort out some issues with. I think it's a great resource. As somebody who's used it, I found it very useful.
Yeah, I've heard that too, quite a bit too. And I know that that's just one of the many resources that are out there for people to use. What else would you suggest people do? Like you said, talk to people, connect with people, but what would be your number one thing if even, I guess let's just kind of flip it a bit. Like, what if even you notice somebody else that you feel like you see some signs that you feel like, this person might need a little bit of help. Like, what would you do? Would you talk to them? Would you direct them into a different, into a area, like a certain direction, or what would you do?
I'm an absolute bleeding heart, so I don't know if my answer would be shared, but whenever I see somebody struggling, pretty much in any capacity, I stop and help. It's just kind of how I'm built. It fills me with purpose and joy to help other people. So whenever I see somebody in a difficult situation, I usually do take it upon myself to attempt to help them, at least to the best of my ability. Obviously, that's not always the case. The issue could be way bigger than something that could be solved in a conversation, or it could be something really small. Or maybe you as a person are just not comfortable approaching a stranger or a coworker or a friend and being like, hey, here's this information. But I do recommend having those conversations, because sometimes people just need to get it out. Venting emotions is just as important as pursuing any kind of therapy or prescription medication, because all that emotional turmoil does in you is just open up wounds, and those wounds don't heal properly, and it just makes it worse. So like if you're seeing signs that maybe a coworker or a friend is not doing so great, maybe just reach out, bring them a coffee, ask them if they want to go get a coffee. It's like a super low key thing. You don't even need to talk, but coffee is a comfort food for a lot of people. So why not? Right? It costs you $2.
Yeah, that is such a great point. I think even, in this post-COVID world, people are still trying to figure out how to interact with others and crowds. And I know it seems like it's like everyone's over that already, but there are still some people that struggle with that. And even, going to the workplace, it might not be every day of the week that you go into work. So I think just even finding that connection and talking to people again is, that's just so powerful. I think it could have a lot of impact on someone's life, even if you don't know what's going on with them. But yeah. So what are some signs that you could see that other people might notice in someone that might, need some help?
Well, I mean, retreating. If you're noticing that somebody who's normally pretty open and bubbly is retreating away from you, that's a really big sign that either something has happened interpersonally or that something's affecting them. It could just be a bad day, but if you're noticing it on a consistent basis or even on a predictable basis, then that's probably a sign that there's something up. Because if it's predictable, that means that there's a consistent event that's happening in this person's life that's causing them stress. And honestly, a huge thing to keep in mind going forward is simply that you really don't know what anybody else on this planet is dealing with. So it's really important to take that into account when you're approaching people about this stuff, because you just don't know. So be empathetic, be open, be kind, be compassionate, but also don't force them to tell you anything. If they don't want to talk about it, that's fine, but give them the option. So say, yes, I'm willing to talk to you about this. If you don't want to talk to me about this, that's fine, but I'm here if you need me.
That is a good tip, because I feel even just starting the conversation is hard and that's why people maybe don't talk about it as much, because no one knows how to open the conversation without, maybe insulting someone or saying the wrong thing. So if you don't want to just come out and say, like, let's talk, like, what would or go for a coffee, I guess, what is a good way to kind of check in, to say, hey, how are you doing? Is everything okay? Like, is that safe to say?
Sometimes that can be all it takes, is just show somebody a smile and like try to cheer them up. Again, like I'm kind of a unique case in that I'm more than happy to talk about my mental illness with literally anybody who wants to hear about it. But for a lot of people, it's a very private experience, as health typically is. Sometimes they don't want to disclose, and that's totally fine. So like, obviously, if you don't have a rapport with the person, you're not friends or work friends with them, I can understand a little bit of reservation in terms of approaching such delicate subjects. But yeah, honestly, something as simple as just saying, hey, how you doing today? I noticed that you're maybe looking a little upset. Are you all right? Do you need me to do anything for you? Like showing that you're there, showing that you're willing to help, showing that you're willing to take something off their plate if you can. Super, super valuable because sometimes things just get really overwhelming. So having one less thing can make the difference.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Robyn, for sharing your story with us. I felt, there were so many different emotions when I was listening, and I feel so lucky that you have shared it with us on this podcast. So we really appreciate it, and so glad that you're doing well and that you're enjoying your time with Paladin, and looking forward to seeing some of the changes you make on the DEI committee too. And thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. It was honestly such a pleasure, and I would happily come back anytime.
Hey, thanks for tuning in with the Difference Makers. If you want to hear more about the ins and outs of the security industry from real professionals, be sure to subscribe, rate, review, and share. Also, check out new episodes on the first Tuesday of every month. Till next time.